the system of equations. We must deal with them all at once. Always looking for solutions. Positive outlook overcome.
Hello, my name is Roy Simpson, professor of mathematics at Cosumnes River College in Sacramento, California. This video is meant for linear algebra students who are currently going through a topic called null space. Now, I hope you've already watched my introductory video to null spaces. We are going to go ahead and dive a little deeper here into how we can find an explicit description of the null space of a given matrix. Now, the note that I have here is very, very important. The null space of a matrix is something to be found once you have been given a matrix. It's not going to be evident from the matrix itself. So you have to actually derive it. Somebody will hand you a matrix. They'll say, hey, I need to know what is the null space of this matrix. You can't just look at the matrix and say, oh, here are all the vectors that are in the null space of your matrix. You have a little bit of work in front of you. To showcase how you would do this, let's go ahead and show an example here. Find an explicit description of the null space of A by listing vectors that span the null space. Well, remember, the null space of this matrix is the set of vectors from the domain of the transformation that map to the zero vector. That is, we want to solve AX equals 0. All the vectors X that get mapped to 0 form our null space. And all we need to do here to find an explicit description of the null space is to find the perfect set of vectors such that all linear combinations of those vectors will create our null space. And to be honest, we've done this before, so it won't be too new. Well, you go to start solving this and you realize we have a pivot right here. We have a pivot right there. This means that we have 3 free variables. So the solution to AX equals 0 can be written in terms of those free variables. So I'm just listing this here. X sub 3, 4, and 5 are free. They're free variables. Now I suppose we could do one action here. We could at least use this pivot right here to kill off the element above. So let's go ahead and do that. It's just nice to kind of write it this way, I think. And remember, we still have these 2 pivots right here. It's just now I know that first row can be written as x sub 1 is equal to negative 6x sub 3 plus 8x sub 4 minus x sub 5. This is basically a rewind all the way back to the beginning of your linear algebra course. We'll do the same thing for row 2, and we have all the information we need. x3, x4, x5 are free variables, and x1 and x2 are described in terms of those free variables. So a solution, or I should say all solutions, to AX equals 0 can be written in the form shown here. Remember, x is just the vector x1, x2, x3, x4, x5, but we know what x1 is. It's x3 times the negative 6, x plus x4 times positive 8, plus x5 times the negative 1. That's just from this right here. X sub 2 is 2x sub 3 minus x sub 4 plus no x sub 5s. X sub 3 is free, so it will only be represented once. If we have one of those x sub 3s, x sub 4 will have one of those, and x sub 5 will have one of those. These 3 vectors are very, very special. Notice if you look at our original matrix, there's no way that looking at our original matrix here, I would have said, oh, you know what builds the null space? The vectors negative 6, 2, 1, 0, 0, 8, negative 1, 0, 1, 0, and negative 1, 0, 0, 0, 1. So again, finding those very special vectors that build our null space requires a little bit of work. Now, to write the explicit description of the null space, we'll just say, you know what? To get any vector in our null space, I just need a linear combination of these 3 vectors. That is, the null space of A is just a span of those 3 very special vectors. Notice that the number of vectors in this set that spans the null space of A is 3. And notice we had 3 free variables. And that's what this formalized theorem is telling us. The number of vectors in the spanning set that builds the null space of A equals the number of free variables in the equation AX equals 0. Now I'm about to step away from this video, and I get it if you say, wow, but that was a very short video for you because your videos are way too long. I totally understand that. But honestly, all I wanted to get done here was to give you the ability to write down an explicit description of the null space of a matrix A. To do so requires you to find the free variables in your given matrix and to solve AX equals 0. Once you solve AX equals 0, you'll have very special vectors that build your null space. Those very special vectors are the ones that span the entire null space. They are these building vectors. I'm trying to avoid a very special word here that I haven't defined yet. So that's why I'm kind of fumbling, trying to not say it. But these building blocks, these 3 vectors are building blocks to your null space. And just to remind you of what we said in the previous video, it's pretty amazing that we've dealt with the homogeneous equation all this time and never really defined the set of solutions to the homogeneous equation. We would just call them the set of solutions to the homogeneous equation. But in reality, that set is called the null space, and that set is a subspace of Rn. And if you want to write an explicit description of that set, just solve the homogeneous equation, write the vector form of the solution to the homogeneous equation, and those vectors that create the vector form will become what we call the spanning set for our subspace, the null space of A. And remember, subspaces are vector spaces as well, so the null space of A is also a vector space. All right, that's it for this video. Short for my videos. I hope that it helps out, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Be a good human.
It's the system of equations. We must deal with them all at once. Always looking for solutions. Positive outlook overcomes obstacles getting in our way. Cause affects more than we can sometimes see. Things for what they are and work together until you feel at peace. Says, listen close, don't talk too much that isn't kosher. You may really hurt inside. It doesn't justify you to speak too loud and cry. Don't whine, just